For a while now, my sister has lived in a house a few blocks away from my parents' house. I live with my parents. I would go over there to babysit my nephew when my sister had plans. Some nights I would sleep over there. Her house always had a creepy feeling to it, a thick feeling to the air. My sister had just had knee surgery and wasn't able to take care of her son, so I was spending the weekend over there. The first couple of nights were fine. I didn't mind at all. But the last night I stayed there, I was in the living room watching TV when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a shadow. Before I say any more, I better tell you the layout of my sister's house. When you walk in, you go to the left and down a hallway. The open doorway to the left leads to the kitchen. The kitchen has another entry as well. The first door on the left is my sister's bedroom. The only door on the right is the bathroom, and the door at the other end of the hallway belongs to my eldest sister, when she's there, that is. On the other side of the kitchen is a set of French glass doors and let out into a game room, an add-on to the house. The doors are always kept closed and locked at night. The only people in the house that night were myself, my sister, the one on the mend, and her son. So anyway, I saw a shadow. At first I thought maybe it was my sister getting up to ask me to get her something. But the shadow simply vanished before I could get a closer look at it. I shrugged it off as me being tired. I lay down to go to sleep. I woke up a couple minutes later. It was around 5 in the morning. I didn't know what had woken me. I was sweating badly, and I felt like someone was sitting on my chest. I was propped up enough to see the French doors, which were across the room from the sofa. What I saw that night is engraved into my brain. There was an old woman outside the doors. She had her hands pressed against two of the glass panels, and her face against another. Her mouth was open in a scream. I was scared beyond belief, because I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't do nothing but lay there. And then the door began rattling. The woman was shaking it. A shadow came out of the kitchen, and the woman vanished. The shadow vanished after that, and I could breathe again. I don't know what the shadow was, but it did make the woman go away. I like to think it was my guardian angel. Who knows? That's my story. Anyway, and yeah, it is true. My mother was born in Austria-Hungary in 1908. When her parents immigrated to the US, they left their 3 children behind in the care of their grandparents. It was 5 years until her parents were able to return and bring the children to the US. In that 5 years, my mother became very close to her grandfather and went everywhere with him. She arrived in the US as a 13-year-old, grew up, and married my father. They were a young farm couple living in rural Ohio. One night, my mother awoke to see her grandfather standing at the foot of her bed. He was smiling at her, but did not speak. She relayed that she pulled the covers over her head and then looked again, and he was still there. She then tried to wake my father, but when he awoke, her grandfather disappeared. She had the overwhelming feeling that her grandfather had died. This happened in the mid-1920s, and at that time, international long distance was only a thing for wealthy folks. Her only contact with her grandparents was via mail, which would take a couple of weeks to arrive. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, she received a letter from her grandmother verifying that her grandfather had passed away On the same day, and approximately the same time that he appeared in our bedroom. My father attested to the entire happening. This was always our family ghost story that no one ever had a reason to doubt. My parents live on a farm in Sugar Grove. My stepdad grew up here with his family as a child. On Christmas Eve in 1964, his dad went into town to pick up the grandma for the holiday. With him, he took a younger daughter and his younger son. On the way home, there was a terrible accident, and everybody died except the daughter. Over the years, the farmhouse was used as rental property until my mom met her husband. They've lived here now for 6 years and have had many experiences with the spirits of this home. I, too, have had some of the same. There are many, many voices that we hear. Marbles rolling down the hallway upstairs, foot noises walking up and down the stairway, clouds of light and dark smoke throughout the entire house, doors open and close, things come up missing, then are returned within days. If you are alone in the house and stand by the sink, you will soon hear a voice that asks you to go away. It will repeat until you walk away from the sink. Standing outside, if you look up into the window upstairs, sometimes you will see a vision of a woman standing in the window. This is believed to be Grandma. I have an 11-year-old daughter that has walked into the downstairs bathroom and ran out, stating there is a man standing at the bathroom sink. He will only turn his head and look at you, and then turn back to the mirror. He hasn't spoken yet. When my parents first came here, they slept upstairs. They had to move to the downstairs room in the winter because no matter what room you are in up there, it is ice cold. We have used electric heat sources to try to generate heat, but it doesn't work. There are also apparitions of faces, white in color, etched into the door of the master bedroom. These appear darker at times and lighter at other times. They appear to be stuck in the wood of the door. It's believed by everyone here that the spirits and happenings of this house are all those family members that were killed in the crash. After all, they all did reside here, and I think they still do. My mother passed away a little over 4 years ago. Since then, we have seen her, usually in dreams, and my father has actually seen her many times in her home. My mother had been sick with congestive heart failure that took a turn for the worst for about 2 years. My dad cared for her day and night. Finally, the last trip to the hospital was supposed to be a routine trip to remove excess fluid. On the way to the hospital, my mother made a prophetic statement to him that she would not be coming home again. When she was given the diagnosis that no further help was available to her and she would be sent home with hospice, she refused and decided to die in the hospital instead of at home because my father had to continue to live there and she did not want him to find it hard to stay at their home. 9 days of excruciating pain from a failing liver and kidneys, and unable to get her breath, she succumbed to death only after the last of our immediate family visited her on that day. It was as if she had waited until she had seen her husband, children, grandchildren, and son-in-laws before she was ready to go. 10 minutes after the last visitor, she breathed her last. Oddly enough, the grandfather clock in my parents' home stopped on the exact time of her death. My father has refused to rewind it. After 60 years of marriage, my father has been so lost. For the first year, she appeared to him frequently with a smile on her face, and one time told him, "I love you deeply, and just want to make sure you are okay. She still appears to him, just not as frequently as the first year. Recently, my sister and father had found a picture she had painted and had it framed to give me for my birthday. My dad saw my mother the morning they gave me the gift and said she was holding a shopping bag with a wooden frame sticking out from it with a huge smile on her face. He said they communicated without talking, and he knew she was happy and proud I was getting the picture. I've seen my mother in dreams, but only one stands out as a possible contact with her. In my dream, I was looking through the picture window at my parents' home and saw her sitting in her chair with my father standing over her, talking and smiling, as if he was catching up on recent events. I went inside the house and she looked at me and smiled. I remember how peaceful she looked and so healthy. I remember saying, "Mama, how can this be? I saw you in the casket at the funeral home." She just smiled at me and said, "Well, sometimes these things just happened." I replied, "Well, I don't care how it happened. I'm glad to have you back. I've missed you." With that, I woke up. One other time, after an extremely frustrating day, I was walking in a corridor and thought I'd heard her call my name. She said, "Susie." I actually said out loud, "Mama?" She was not even there. My sister says she has dreamed of her, but never actually have seen her. My son slept in my mom's bed about 6 months after her passing, and said sometimes in the night, he felt her sit down on the side of the bed. He knew it was her, because he could smell her perfume. My nephew recalled a dream he had the first Thanksgiving holiday after her passing. He said that in his dream, he walked out of his upstairs bedroom, and she was in the hallway. He said, "Let's go get some turkey, Granny." He said she replied, "Now, Mark, you know I can't go downstairs with you this year, but you know I am here." My family feels that she is around us all the time. I know she is with my father the most, because he is terminally ill and misses her so terribly. I feel comforted knowing she is waiting for his time to cross over. My mother is a current janitor working at Rockford College, and one of the buildings she is assigned to cleans happens to be the Burpee Building. There, she and some of the other ladies that work with her have lunch in that specific building every work night. A while back, she told us that during her lunch break, she saw what was a female figure walk past the room they were in. She said she wore a blue dress and had blonde hair. The room has a mirror that faced the only door of the small area. She said, and I quote, "I glanced at the mirror, a habit of doing when you're in that room a lot, and saw this thin, transparent figure walk past the door. I thought it was one of the other girls that was walking by, but it wasn't until I realized that no one that night was wearing a blue dress or had dyed their hair blonde. I walked out to see if it was a trespasser, but saw no one in the hall. I called security and asked them if they allowed any blonde, blue-dressed girl on the property. They denied doing so, confirming my suspicions that it was possibly a ghost. This is just one of the stories that she has told us during the last 2 years of her encounters with the Burpee ghosts. This just happened to me just recently, on February 8th, 2008, when I took a ghost tour of the Tuang Cemetery in Brisbane, Australia. First of all, I'd like to keep this to myself anonymous. Secondly, what I saw is true, for I did some research to see if anyone else experienced what I saw that night, and As it turns out, a few people over the years saw it too. It was cold and partly windy that night when I turned up at the ghost of the Two-Wing Boneyard, Brisbane's oldest and biggest graveyard. There's a lot of strange stories connected to this boneyard, like a vampire. There's only 2 boneyards in the world that got fair dinkum vampires, Highgate in London and Two-Wing in Brisbane. The Bleeding Grave and Walking Statue. Yes, a wandering statue. Anyway, the tour barely began as our hostess was introducing herself when I saw something standing amongst the trees. It was solid and black. It was standing there watching us. I saw it, but I thought I was seeing things. Excitement that might have sparked off my imagination. But as I walked past this spot, there was nothing there to resemble that figure. But yet it was real, as you and I. It wasn't until a few feet ahead, I heard a weird clang sound right next to me, as if someone was banging on a pot or whatever. I thought it was the signpost rattling, but there was no signpost anywhere. Now that was frickin' weird, I thought as I hurried on, looking behind me. Most of the night I felt we were being followed by something, as I was tailing Charlie. Best place to be on a ghost tour at the end of the line. Things started to get a bit stranger, like the cold wind I felt touching me if there was no wind blowing. The same thing happened again 2 nights later, when I felt something touching my neck in my own home, or seeing things at the corner of my eyes. When I turn around, there will be nothing there. I thought I was ready for the madhouse at one point. I know that I saw something, so I researched it, and as it turned out, others saw that same black figure at the same spot where I saw him or her, whatever the heck it was, and heard the same clanging sound I heard, so I didn't imagine it at all. I hope I didn't. That's my story. I've got other great spine-chilling tales, which I'll put up ASAP, but this was the first experience I had in years, except for the ghost of my dog who came back for a few nights to bark goodbye to us. My name is Tina. I'm 33, and I have a story I would like to share with you and your readers. I've been experiencing strange things for many years now, but I've only been sharing them for just a few people who don't believe always have the need to find something wrong with the ones who do. My mom was one of those people. She would roll her eyes and say I was crazy or I had been drinking. The day she became a believer was one of the most beautiful moments we've ever shared. This is our story. My mom had surgery in her foot and was using a walker to get around. I was at her house helping her with her laundry and such, and had laid my son down in the bedroom down the hall for his nap. Mom was kicked back in the recliner and decided she would also take a nap. All my chores were done for the time. Everybody in the house was sleeping, so I went out to get into the pool. I turned on the baby monitor at the room where my son was sleeping and brought the other piece outside with me. My mom lives out in the country. No neighbors close enough for monitor to pick up any other signals from a phone or another baby monitor. It was so quiet in my mom's house, I could hear the tick-tock ticking of the clock in the room where the monitor was. All of a sudden, I heard a woman's voice so clear and loud. It sounded like she was speaking into the monitor. It sounded like peep, as in P-E-E peep. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe it was just gibberish. That's what I heard. At this point, I start to run to the door to see if my mom is still in the chair in the living room. I got to the door, snatched it open, and there was my mom, still reclined back in the chair with a really strange look on her face. I guess I had a strange look on my face too, because she said, "What? What's the matter? Who's here? Who are you talking to?" I just looked at her and couldn't say anything. She asked again who I was talking to, and I said nobody. Why? She said that she heard a woman talking. She thought she was dreaming. She opened her eyes, and the woman was still talking, so she knew she wasn't dreaming. Having to always have an explanation for things, she then assumed I was on the phone, but looked around and saw the phone and my cell phone were on the kitchen counter. That was when I came in the door, and she knew it wasn't me. I said, "Heard that too?" "Yes," she said, with a very strange look on her face. So I went down to the hall to the room where my son was still sleeping and looked around. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing out of place. I came back down the hall and told my mom he was fine, still sleeping, hadn't moved an inch. She was a little freaked out, but she started asking me questions about my great-grandmother, who often visits me, and the places that I go. I never met my great-grandmother in person, but I've had many run-ins with her spirit. My mom didn't want to believe that Grandma visits her too, but after that day, she started to believe, not only in ghosts and spirits, but in me too. Thanks, Grandma Daisy. This is a true murder story that happened around the early 1900s in the Woods Mooring Circle, Mapleville, Rhode Island. This story is a more true and detailed story of the one before that my great-grandmother told me about. Catherine was a mill owner's daughter. She was a very pretty tall blonde. She was engaged to a local farmer, Robert. Catherine, though, had one problem. A man, who some say had mental issues, was stalking Catherine. His name was David. David would send Catherine letters of how much he loved her, and how they could have babies together. These letters disturbed Catherine. He would watch her through the window and follow her wherever she went. One day, Catherine confronted him and told him never to talk to her again. David thought this was like a game, so he proceeded to send disturbing letters and watch her at all times. As a few days went by, he gave up. With this, he had a plan. If he couldn't love her, no one else could. So one day, while Catherine was going to the woods to get water for her family, David followed. First, he stopped at Catherine's fiance's farm. Robert was working on the farm as usual, and David came in from behind and stabbed him in the back with a pitchfork. Then he went off to find Catherine. Catherine was sitting next to a pond under a hemlock tree. David pulled out his knife and stabbed her through the neck. She screamed in pain as David ripped open her body. As she died, David messed with her dying body. Afterwards, he took her organs out, cut off her breasts, and nailed her heart to a tree, covered in blood. David went home and took a nap. He was supposedly awoken by the sound of dripping. He looked around his room, and it was covered in blood. In the middle of the room, Catherine stood there cursing at him. David had gone insane. He wrote his last letter to the police, telling them what he did, where her body was, and all that happened. He drowned himself the next day in a river, his body sprawled out on a rock, broken. Catherine and Robert were buried in a now abandoned cemetery, and David's body was thrown into a pit. During a biopsy, they found a heart in David's stomach. Some people think he swallowed her heart, while others think Catherine put it there. Still, rumors persist that late at night in the cemetery, you could see the couple holding hands as if nothing ever happened. I believe I had a true experience with a shadow person, This is my story. It was maybe 11-ish at night. My boyfriend and myself were watching a movie. The lights were dim in the house. The house is more than 100 years old. From where I was seated, I could see the dining area, which was dark, and the kitchen doorway, which had a dimmed overhead light on, and the light was spilling into the dining room. I noticed a distinct shadow movement in the light from the kitchen, like someone or something walked past the light. I turned my head fully towards the doorway now, and saw a solid black elongated ovalish shape towards the top of the doorway, and it quickly slipped into the kitchen. My immediate reaction was not of fear, but sort of like, okay, what the heck was that? I wasn't alarmed. I continued watching the movie thinking of explanations for what I just saw. Now let me tell you, there are 3 dogs in the home as well as the 2 of us. My boyfriend's 2 dogs were asleep on the floor by our feet, and my dog was by my side on the couch. He's small. He was acting a bit odd, nervous now. Perhaps he sensed it in me. 30 minutes later, he got down and headed towards the kitchen. He had just got his head in the door and promptly stopped. I couldn't see his head and shoulders, just his back end. I saw his neck raise like he was looking up, and then it happened. It took my breath and gave me chills. He started wagging his tail, slow at first, like he was unsure, and then the momentum slowly gained. He never got to a full-on happy to see you wag. Then he abruptly stopped and came back to my side. He would not enter the kitchen. And in case you think maybe he was looking out a window, no, the window was too high up to see anything. My name is Guy, and I would like to share my experience at Lambertville High School. I've been there numerous times. I live about 25 minutes away in Pennsylvania. My friends and I are ghost hunters, and Lambertville is a favorite spot of ours. The first time I visited the school was about 2 years ago, in 2005 and 2006, and I've been curious about it ever since then. I've had many comments about history of this amazing site. I've been through some of the school, not all of it though, because the building is in poor shape. The first time we went, we didn't encounter anything out of the ordinary. Back then, we had no equipment except our eyes and ears and flashlights. We really didn't venture inside until the second trip, but that was during the day and also uneventful. The third trip back to the school was a shocker that still gives me chills to this day. We went on a summer night, around midnight, or maybe a little later than that, and not a smart thing to do, but we didn't know any better. We parked the car out in front of the steps leading up to the school. We were to go in shifts up and into the school. 2 go and 2 stay in the car to watch for cops. We were there for 5 minutes before 2 of my friends came sprinting to the car screaming, "Drive! Drive!" Me and my friend, who stayed in the car, were wondering what was literally scaring them to insanity. What they told us was pretty crazy at first. They said that while they were walking up the steps to the school, they heard the sounds of little children, little girls, giggling and laughing. At first I didn't believe it and wanted to go back to experience this for myself. I'm the kind of person that has to see to believe, but it's the hope of that proof that draws me back to this school. Anyway, that incident was about 2 years ago, and between my friends, it has been just a story with no proof. No proof until now. Last week, May 2008, me and my friends met up again, thanks to school being finished, and decided to go back. We went that night around 10 to 10:30 and stayed there for a good hour and ventured inside. Though we heard no laughing, I'm still a believer. I believe my friend's story and everyone else's stories of little children laughing because I caught it on tape. I recently purchased some equipment to help capture paranormal activity, and the most valuable tool I had that night was my recorder. It's amazingly lucky that I caught anything at all, because I only recorded audio for about 7 minutes of our hour-long investigation. And all but about a minute of the audio has voices on it that were not ours. I also caught the voice of maybe a teacher or student saying, "Does he seem okay?" in a 2-minute long conversation with what I believe is a female and a male that answers a question that I ask. I've showed this tape to my family and friends, and they all hear talking as well, and the laughter seems to freak everyone out. I wanted to make sure that what I was hearing was, well, what I was hearing. When I heard the laughing on the tape, I thought, my God, they weren't joking or trying to scare us. They really did hear something that night, something that I would like to share with your website, if that is alright with you. I just want to know that there's something other than this life. And that is what draws me to the paranormal. Thank you for your time, and thank you for reading this. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to ask. I'd love to share these clips with you guys and your viewers. This is in reference to your listing for the Hearthstone Inn, Colorado Springs, Colorado. This place has much more than a little girl. As a housekeeper there in 1999, I was able to experience almost all of the hauntings. In the south building, 3rd floor, the little girl would appear regularly, as well as the man in brown in the main bedroom, also in the southwest corner of the floor. He was harmless and would usually disappear as soon as spotted. On the 3rd floor, I've never felt alone, would often hear the little girl and running and laughing. 2 of the 4 bedrooms on the 1st floor share a bedroom. I learned to prop the door open while cleaning, or I would be locked in. The first time I was locked in, I rattled the door and was screaming for the other housekeeper. I was nearly hysterical when she let me out after about 5 minutes. Also in the south building, 1st floor, there was a bedroom at the end of the hall that used to be under the stairway. The back stairway of this building, when it was a hotel, led outside. Many of our guests reported having the dreams of the woman in this room. I would feel her, but never see her. I would have trouble with the lights and an unwelcoming presence. On one occasion, the owner, David Oxhandler, spent the night in the room. On having a very vivid dream of this woman and dismissing it as a dream, he was too shaken to go back to sleep. When he stepped outside to have a cigarette, he turned around, feeling he was not alone, and actually saw her, dressed as just in the dream, floating where the stairs would have been. Rumors she was the victim of a lover's quarrel and was shot on the back stairs. The last one I knew of was in the north building, 2nd floor. One room next to the stairs facing east was never pleasant to be in. The light was very temperamental, flickering and choosing when to be on or off. I would feel a presence on the floor, but really tried to ignore it until one day I was standing near the stairs with several heavy bundles of laundry to take downstairs, when I felt a pressure on the right side small of my back. Just a little shove, and I nearly went headfirst down the stairs, and not of my own volition. Last I hear, the Oxlanders were doing haunted history tours of their hotel. Shortly after, it has been sold to another local organization. Very much worth adding some info to your site, and thanks for the space. My wife and I had several experiences in our apartment over the last 3 years we have lived here. It began with hearing noises and creaks in the building, early on, and slowly evolved to seeing shadows in the middle of the night in our bedroom. We both have had experiences where we thought to have seen a little boy in blue pajamas looking at things in our bedroom. 3 major events have occurred, which I'll describe in detail. Event 1, summer of 2006. My brother was staying over because he is a minor, and our mother was going out of town. We had woken up late to eat breakfast and were playing a game of cards. As we are brothers and there is a significant age gap, we sometimes argue. I was being a little bit of a jerk, picking on a card selection he had made, when our kitchen trash can started to rock back and forth. We were the only people present in the apartment, and we were about 10 yards from the trash can. I investigated the trash can further to find that it was nearly empty and there was nothing that could have moved, so we went to the park. Event 2, winter of 2007. My wife and I were growing fascinated with the television show Ghost Hunters. We had spent an entire day watching episodes from the 2nd season DVD. Being cocky and joking with my wife over her growing discomfort with the mood the show was setting, I began joking about talking on the ghost of the apartment, saying such things as, "If anyone is here, come here and get me," or "You can't touch me, you're just a ghost, I don't believe in you." Later that night, at 4 a.m., I woke up quite distressed and felt that the apartment was shaking from a significant earthquake. I was sure that it was the big one and rushed to jump out of bed and pull my wife to safety in a doorway. She was in a state of shock as I lifted her out of bed and was scared of an earthquake also. When we finally got to the doorway and calmed down, I explained to her that I thought there was an earthquake but couldn't feel it anymore. She couldn't either. I began to grow very nauseous and leaned on her for support. I told her I wasn't feeling right and I blacked out. As I was blacked out, I heard sounds of people talking very quickly. At first I thought it was my wife, and I tried to tell her to slow down. I felt the sensation of running very quickly while I was hearing the rapid dialogue. I was growing angry when suddenly I awoke lying on the floor with my wife over me. She told me she thought I was having a seizure or something because all of my muscles had lightened, and I was screaming and moaning in a sense of fear. She said that I had also grown pale. All throughout that night, I felt the bed continue to shake. Event 3, soon after Event 2. I was angered by an experience I had felt earlier in Event 2, where I had awoken to what I thought to be an earthquake and experienced what I thought to be a form of being possessed. I researched how to hold a seance to converse with spirits present within the room and invited friends over to help with the conversation. I didn't describe the experience I had felt earlier so that it would not affect my friends' experiences that night. In the middle of the seance, one of my friends began to grow woozy and sway forward when he suddenly stopped it. He said that he couldn't go on and felt like someone was talking quickly to him, and he had felt the sensation of running, identical to my experience earlier. I shared with him my experience, and we decided not to continue. Also, this night, my friend's car got a flat tire while parked in my apartment, and only needed to be refilled with air as there was no puncture to cause the flat, as if someone deflated it. Also, another friend was called by his girlfriend within minutes of us ending the seance because she felt something had happened and was worried. He had only told her he was going to see me and not anything about what we were doing that night. The friend with the flat also received a phone call from his aunt about an hour after, whom he speaks with rarely, because she had similar concerns as my friend's girlfriend. How's that for women's intuition? Ever since that last event, nothing else has occurred. This is a personal experience that to this day has left me shaken. There is something wrong with this apartment complex. My experience centered on the apartment we were in, but from other residents, I heard other tales that made me really not want to live there, and as soon as I could get out, my husband and I certainly did. Trail Apartments located in South Lyon. There was a huge tree right directly in front of it. Apparitions have been seen in the little hallway between bathroom and bedroom. The panel in the hallway leading up to the crawlspace had moved on its own. Personal experience was actually in the bathtub, and the only one home when it happened. I'm all of 5 foot, and that ceiling is a good 8 feet. There was no way for me to get up there. We figured that the only way to move that panel was to be up in the crawlspace. Each crawlspace is self-contained. EVPs have gotten into the apartment of a young woman with an accent saying, "Can't stay too long," and sleep. Both still have. If you leave the apartment door open while taking a shower, you get this feeling that you are being watched. Then look out. You see the retreating figure of what looks to be a young woman. I'd had this happen and thought I'd left my apartment door open, and it was a neighbor, and upon investigation, found my door deadbolt was locked. Numerous pictures of orbs and odd shadows have been captured in this apartment. All still have. Late at night, you can also hear someone walking past the apartment, and when you go to look, there is no one on the walkway. And considering where the apartment is, there's no way for someone to get down it quick enough without hearing the sounds of running feet. Have had an experience of having the front door hit several times while I was to people, and no one was there. Stories were also told to me of the laundry room in the same building is also a place of odd occurrences. Feelings of being watched and hearing a young woman's voice. Have felt the being watched part, but considering that the old furnace system was right there in the laundry room, I dismissed it. A lot of my family and husband's family refused to spend the night there just cause the place gave them the creeps, and this was prior to some of these events happening. I've tried to find out if there have been any deaths or murders or anything on that ground, and I came up with nothing. All I know is that the place was just, there was something wrong with it, and I wish I had never moved into it. The EVPs were caught when that building had few residents. I still have them, just have others listen to them from time to time to prove I wasn't crazy with what I heard. The pictures are numerous, and some still make the hair on my arm stand up because of the experiences with them. In October 2008, my friends Scott, Denny, and Steve and I decided we wanted to go ghost hunting. Scott was the only one who had experience with anything, and he had seen things and had things happen to him and other people in his past groups. We started off by going to Peace Church Cemetery and where the murderer Billy Cook is buried. We were equipped with a video camera, me, a digital camera, a digital voice recorder, a heavy-duty flashlight, Scott, and 2 smaller flashlights with the other 2 people. We walked around for a little bit as Scott instructed us to let our senses take hold of us and guide us as they please. If we got an impulse to do something, do it. We all had weird feelings, but eventually realized we weren't going to find anything here. We left, deciding to go somewhere that Scott had experienced before, the Waco Cemetery. Once we got there, we said our opening prayer and made our way out into the cemetery. Eventually, we split into 2 groups, me and Steve in one, Scott and Denny in the other. Steve told me to get a couple of specific things on video. He thought he had seen something he said was best described as a specter, with a head that shaped into a point and a cloaked black body. We walked around for a bit longer, and he told me he had seen it again. We walked towards the area he saw it, and didn't see anything. We met back up with Denny and Scott on the other side of the cemetery, and Scott started talking about the things that had happened to him here. He had been asking questions, and talking in general, trying to pick up some EVP. He started talking about what he called the prankster that had slapped him in the face and possibly put scratches down his friend's back. We made our way back to the center of the cemetery where there were no graves, just a patch of grass. We stood around, and Steve told the other two about the specter he had seen and where he had seen it. Around that time, Scott said lights out. He took a couple of pictures, and the rest was silent. Then, we turned our lights back on for a few seconds before Scott repeated his order of lights out. This part gets a little blurry. I can't remember if it was before or after we turned the lights back on, but Scott is a big guy, wide and tall. He fell backwards onto Steve, who would have fallen on me had I not moved in time. He had fallen hard. He laid there and just looked confused, and his face was red. His glasses had flown off of impact of the fall. He asked where his glasses were. Then he asked, "Did I fall?" We tried to explain what happened from each of our perspectives quickly, as we were pretty freaked out, since this was our first experience. He had asked a couple more times as the rest of us came to the conclusion that he fell too hard to have just fallen from a loss of balance. I, for one, think he was pushed by some force. Anyway, we got him up to his feet. He looked around and said, "We're leaving." Scott was shaken, and that was all we needed to hear. As we walked back to our cars to say a closing prayer, Scott started coughing, which progressed into dry heaving. We had 8 Hardees before we went to the first place, so we knew that he had something to throw up. We stopped to wait for him, and after he felt better, we proceeded to walk to a space between the cars to say the prayer. Scott began, "Our Father which art in heaven." It was interrupted by more dry heaving. Steve said, "Scott, are you okay?" He nodded and said, "Hallowed be thy," and cut off to some dry heave some more. This time, it was so bad that he lost his glasses and was down on his knees coughing up something that wasn't there. He looked up, straight at me, and gave the most evil glare I've ever seen. I immediately recoiled in fear, with tears forming in my eyes. I asked Scott, "Scott, are you there?" He got over this fit eventually as Steve said, "Hallowed by thy what? Finish the prayer, Scott. You have to finish it." Scott straightened up a little and hoarsely started to finish, "Hallowed be thy name." Again, the same occurrence had just happened, and he just kept coughing and dry heaving. At this point, Scott has regained his composure enough to finish, and says, "For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen." As we each followed with a thankful amen, he said, "Now let's get the heck out of here." I was ahead of him in parking, so I started the car and drove out of the cemetery as fast as possible. We stopped into a church parking lot up the road. Scott got out of his car, and we started talking about what just happened. He claimed to have no recollection of falling or anything after that. That's the story of what happened in Southwest Missouri on a late October night. May you form your own conclusions, and I hope you enjoyed. I've felt the presence of ghosts at some places I've been or lived at. I've never had an experience of seeing a ghost, but I can walk into a place and tell if there's a ghost there. I know if it's a male, female, or child. I've seen dark shadows, but not all have been black. Some are gray, like the color of a rat. One night, a very good friend of mine came over and we started watching a movie and eating pizza. I saw the dark outline of a male child peeking around the corner of the kitchen. I told my friend Don, who is very religious, and at first she didn't believe me. I kept seeing the outline of a head and shoulders peeking around the corner. Then, about 5 minutes or so later, we started hearing a scratching noise. I told Dawn that's the ghost. She said it was just a mouse. Then, I heard a loaf of bread fall on the floor. The bread is kept on the counter far back next to the microwave. I got up to investigate. The bread was lying on the floor, but had no holes in it from a mouse. I put the bread back and went back into the living room. Dawn got up to get a glass of soda, and when she went into the kitchen, she yelled. She said the loaf of bread moved across the counter and dropped on the floor at her feet. She started praying. Every time she stopped praying, you could hear scratching noises. She kept praying, and the scratching continued. Then it got quiet. We finished the movie, and as we were talking, we noticed the lid on the pizza box, which was propped up, started to slip down. Instead of just falling down, it closed. This was very slowly. Dawn said she had enough and went home. She took the pizza and box home with her. She called me later that night and said that the ghost followed her home because her bread was constantly sliding off the counter, and she actually saw the pizza lid open when it was closed in the box. She said she threw the bread and pizza box off her balcony and prayed really hard. She didn't have any more problems, and our bread stayed on our counters after that. I was at the age of 12 to 13 when my grandmother bought me a rocking chair out of what she said was a yard sale. She claimed that they were very glad to get rid of it, and she never thought to ask why. She brought it home and sat it in my room with my dolls on it. It was an antique, so I was leery about anyone sitting in it. I never experienced any weird activities in it, but my brother at the age of 9 years was sitting in the living room where he could see it and claimed to have seen it rock 3 times. It scared him to the point where he just ran outside to my grandmother, crying and screaming. I was confused, and my grandmother told me to keep it closed and keep my door shut. Later, my aunt said she went into my room to get something, and she also seen it move. I was getting mad, thinking that there was something wrong with my chair, and hid it in my closet. The last person that had seen it move was my little cousin, due to us moving to another location. She agreed to keep it in her room, where she did not stay at the time, but went in and out of there when needed. She was doing her hair in a dresser mirror when she got a glimpse of the rocker moving. Then, to her surprise and fright, a little girl appeared. She said she was very beautiful in an older clothing. She screamed and ran from the room. It took her some time to calm down to tell what happened, and there I was, ready to get rid of it also. The one thing I did find out about the chair before giving it away was that it hated men. Due to my family's curiosity, my great uncle was determined to see it and experience it sliding away from him across the room. He was nevertheless very scared and left quickly. I'm glad I gave it away and didn't think twice, but never had it do anything in front of me. I didn't experience this myself. It happened to my mother a couple of months ago, and she told me about it after it happened. What happened was, a couple of months ago, my mom was prepping for a party in our kitchen at about 9:30 p.m. Me and my brother, who were about 11 at the time, were both at the house at the time. I was upstairs, and he was in the living room. My mom told me that she was washing dishes, and that she looked up at the window in front of her, and she saw someone walk by the hallway behind her. She immediately thought that it was me, because of how tall the person was. She called out my name, and told me to do something for her. After a couple of minutes, She came to look for my brother to ask where I had went. He looked at her like she was crazy and told her that I hadn't come downstairs for about an hour. She calmed me down noticeably scared because she thought someone was in the house, but we couldn't find anyone. This happened more than once to my mother, but more noticeable. She was washing clothes and had to walk through the kitchen and saw someone poke their head out from behind the counter. She of course thought that it was either me or my brother, but when she checked, she found no one. She called me immediately and told me what had happened, and now we believe that a ghost is in the house, but it doesn't show itself regularly. 2 other things that have happened since then. One happened a couple months after that. Me and my brother had a friend over, and he had gone to the bathroom on the 2nd story of the house. No one was up there at the time, but when he came down, he said that he had seen 2 red eyes down the hall near my parents' bedroom. He immediately ran downstairs, and we told him about my mother's experiences. The other things that happen more frequently now is that our dog starts to growl at something in the hallway. She sleeps in our parents' room, and sometimes she will get up and walk around the room, and then she will stop in the doorway and growl at something in the hallway. But when we turn on the light, there will be nothing there. It has been a couple of months since anything worth reporting has happened, but we believe that it is a friendly ghost and nothing harmful will come of it. Even though I'm terrified of this kind of stuff, reading stories and watching things on TV about it is very interesting to me. I have a story to share. It's still very fresh to me, even though it has happened many years ago that it has taken place. My husband and kids laugh at me when I tell them my story, just because some of the things that went on. They find it more humorously amusing than seriously true. This story took place when I was about 5 or 6 years old, in a house we lived at in Oregon, Ohio. I really don't even know where to begin. The house was a 2-story home that wasn't huge, but sure wasn't small. I had 2 brothers, and they shared a bedroom with me, having my own bedroom right next to theirs. In their closet was this blue plastic hanging shoe rack that was left when we moved in. It was completely empty, except for a few bouncy balls and a metal jack in some of the pockets. Every day we would check these pockets because whenever we would empty them, there was always more the next day. I never thought anything weird about that. It was cool finding things in there. My room had a door that led to the closet. I never heard anything scary in my room, but one night, my grandparents spent the night. They came from Florida and were visiting us before moving on to other relatives. In the middle of the night, everyone ran into the room because my grandpa woke up screaming. He said the cat had crawled under the mesh part of the box spring and scared him. Everyone went back to bed and nothing was thought of it. Months went by and summer was here. My brothers and I used to all lay in the hallway upstairs outside our rooms in front of a box fan my dad would put up because it was so hot. Sometime in the middle of the night, my younger brother Mike woke up, I guess to sleep in my room, and began screaming. He said my older brother's Jake's face was on the wall scaring him. Jake had been laying in the hallway the entire time with me and Mike. Still, everyone shrugged it off like the other things that happened and figured he was sleepwalking. I've heard things throughout the night on and off after the last incident, but the last and scariest part of the house that happened to me, and I'm not sure how much time in between this happened, is one night when I was sleeping with my cat. It was sometime in the middle of the night, and for some reason I woke up. My cat also woke up. My cat was tucked under my arm at my side, and all of a sudden, it opened its eyes wide and hissed with its hair standing up on its back. Then it darted out of my room. I didn't understand why the cat acted like this. And seconds later, at the end of my bed was this figure. It was definitely human, but was all white and misty. It had no features or limbs. The only feature I remember is seeing an O-like shaped mouth. It was just standing there, but then looked like it was moving slowly closer. I kicked my feet at it, and nothing happened. I just kicked right through it. I was scared to death and ran into my parents' room and slept there the rest of the night. I thought I heard sounds coming from the drawers in my dad's dresser the rest of the night, but never heard anything or seen anything since. My husband, like I said, finds this humorous, so last year, he bought some ball and jacks and placed them on my pillow and laughed. I would love to find out if anyone living in that house after or before me ever had any experiences like that. I always wondered why that thing would want to scare us like that. My grandfather was a member of Washington Country Golf Club in Washington County, Pennsylvania. The golf club sits on top of a hill and used to be a very old farmhouse that dates back to the 1800s. He told me stories of him along with a group of friends who spent the night at the clubhouse. Members were allowed to stay there if they wished. It was said the old farmer who lived in the house lost all of his money and the farm went under. After this all happened, the farmer then decided to end it all. My grandfather said that during the late hours of night, you can hear footsteps walking back and forth upstairs. They went upstairs, and no one was to be found. Even in the ballroom, the lights would be seen turning off and on by themselves, as doors were being opened and closed as well. I myself have been in the clubhouse, which is very old, with wooden stairs and floors. I have even seen the bar going across the staircase, where it said the farmer had done the deed. I've heard this story from other members of the club. Whether this is true for sure or not, I don't know exactly. Another story I've heard takes place in Peters Township in Washington County. I've been told by an old football coach whose family lived in the town all their life, dating back to the 1700s, I believe. He tells a story of an old haunted railroad tunnel close to Hidden Valley Road in the area. It's said that many years ago, when the railroad was a busy place, a man was hooking up two boxcars. The boxcars then rolled together, hitting the man in between the two hookups. The man was cut in half from the two boxcars, and many people say that they have walked the tunnel holding hands across the tunnel very late in the night. They said they have seen a man walking at the other end of the tunnel with an old oil lamp in his hand, swinging back and forth. They even say that a train can be heard off in the distance, but no train even came. The story has been known as Boxcar Willie. I've heard this story from many different people in the past. I've seen the tunnel myself one night with two of my friends. We held hands going across the front of the tunnel. We all then saw a very small light at the end of the tunnel. Never went to check it out, but something was there. We all saw this light. It may have been something off in the distance, but I believe it was Boxcar Willie. We all felt something very weird that night. That's why I get the feeling something was out there.
Hey Phantom, so first of all, I wanted to thank you guys for tuning into this compilation of sorts. Obviously, if you made it this far, then you watched the entire video, which I'm so proud of you for doing. Why don't you go ahead and actually like that video, or this video rather, and leave a like, and after leaving a like, you can actually share this video, because I totally didn't forget what I was going to say, so that's why I said the same thing twice. Guys, no, seriously, thank you so much for the support. I really don't have much to say other than, well, when do I really have anything to say? Anyway, guys, love you so much. Please share the video, like it, as I said numerous times already, and I'll see you in the next video. Hope you enjoyed the compilation as much as I did, because I enjoyed it too. Love you, and see you in the next video.